You are on your own. If your son doesn't make it, that is none of our business." My father spat those heartless words at me as I sobbed on their living room floor. I was on my knees, begging my parents to return the $100,000 they had borrowed from my savings over a year ago. I desperately needed my own money back to pay for my son's life-saving bone marrow transplant. The deadline was closing in and I had nowhere else to turn. Without a single ounce of guilt, my mother coldly looked down at me and added, "Consider that money payment for raising you. My name is Renata, a 32-year-old widowed mother." At that exact second, watching the people who brought me into this world casually dismiss my child's survival, the last shred of my family loyalty completely shattered. They did not just deny my plea. They physically pushed me out of their front door into the freezing night, leaving me with absolutely nothing but a ticking clock on my little boy's life. But the universe has a highly precise way of balancing the scales. They threw me to the wolves when I needed them the most. Exactly 2 years later, a massive financial betrayal stripped them of every single thing they owned. Homeless, broke, and desperate, my parents came crawling to my doorstep in the middle of the night, begging for the very mercy they once denied me. My final response left them absolutely speechless. A few hours before those cruel words were spoken, I frantically drove my car through the dark night of Tucson, gripping Milo's medical file tightly against the steering wheel. The phone call from the hospital was still ringing in my ears. The doctor's voice was strict and urgent. They had found a viable bone marrow match, but the window to proceed was rapidly closing. We only had a matter of hours to secure the funding and prep Milo for the transplant. The hospital administration required the massive out-of-pocket costs up front before moving him into the operating room. I needed that $100,000 immediately to save my boy. I pulled up to my parents' house, the tires screeching loudly against the driveway. I threw the car into park and ran. I pushed the front door open and rushed inside. The atmosphere in the living room was nauseatingly calm. My parents were sitting comfortably on their expensive leather sofas. Across from them sat my sister Colleen and my brother-in-law Grant. Grant was holding a glass of wine, leaning forward and speaking enthusiastically about a highly lucrative real estate investment. I stormed right into the center of the room and slammed the thick medical file onto the glass coffee table. The loud crack silenced everyone instantly. Grant stopped talking mid-sentence. "Milo is out of time," I announced, struggling to catch my breath as tears streamed down my face. "The hospital found a match. They need to do the transplant tonight. I need my money back right now. I need the $100,000 you borrowed from me." Nobody rushed to comfort me. Nobody asked how Milo was doing. Instead, looks of extreme annoyance washed over their faces. Grant slowly placed his wine glass on the table and let out a loud sigh. "Are you seriously barging in here like this?" he demanded. "We are in the middle of a business discussion." He looked at me with disgust. "Listen, you chose to marry that broke guy, Aaron. You knew he had absolutely nothing. Now you expect everyone else to clean up your mess? You married a broke man, so you deal with the consequences." Colleen crossed her arms and sneered. "Grant is right," my sister chimed in, rolling her eyes. "You always do this. You always play the victim. Stop trying to ruin our evening with your drama." I ignored them and turned directly to my father. "Dad, this is not about Aaron. This is about the money you and Mom took from my savings. You promised you were using it to renovate this house. I can see you did not fix a single thing. You promised to pay it back. My son is lying in a hospital bed waiting for surgery. Give me my money." My father, Gerald, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hated being challenged, especially in front of his wealthy son-in-law. His face turned bright red, his pride wounded. Instead of showing an ounce of compassion, he went completely on the defensive. "Lower your voice in my house," Gerald snapped, pointing a harsh finger directly at my face. "Every family has hard times. You act like we did this on purpose to hurt you. We do not have that cash sitting in a drawer for you to grab whenever you feel panicked." "It is my money," I screamed, the panic completely taking over my body. "You owe me. I will not let my son pass away because you refuse to pay your debts." That was his breaking point. Gerald stood up, towering over me, his face contorted with pure rage. He grabbed me tightly by the upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "You are on your own," he yelled directly into my face. "If your son does not make it, that is none of our business." My mother, Sheila, remained seated on the sofa. "Consider that $100,000 payment for raising you," she added coldly. Gerald yanked me toward the entryway. I fought back, kicking and screaming, desperate to make them understand. But he shoved me violently through the front door. I stumbled backward, falling hard onto the cold concrete porch. Before I could even stand up, the heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked. I was completely alone in the freezing wind, empty-handed, with the clock ticking down on my son's life. Early the next morning, as I rested my exhausted head against the cold wall outside the intensive care unit, the cell phone in my coat pocket suddenly vibrated. The screen displayed an unknown international number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another aggressive debt collector harassing me, but a strange instinct forced my thumb to answer. I pressed the phone to my ear, my hands trembling slightly. "Am I speaking to Renata?" A deep, authoritative voice demanded. "Yes, who is this?" I whispered, my throat raw from hours of screaming earlier that night. "My name is Edmund. I am your late husband's grandfather," the man announced. My breath caught in my throat. Aaron had rarely spoken about his extended family, only mentioning a bitter estrangement that happened years before we even met. I had absolutely no idea anyone from his wealthy bloodline was actively looking for us. Edmund did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He aggressively explained that he had received the tragic news of Aaron's passing several months too late. The moment he uncovered the truth, he hired an elite corporate investigation firm to locate his only remaining grandson. It took his private detectives months to track us down, because I had completely isolated myself, working multiple cash jobs and living in cheap rental apartments just to keep Milo alive. "I know everything," Edmund declared, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "I know about the leukemia diagnosis. I know about the bone marrow match. And I know the hospital is threatening to cancel the procedure over funding. You will not lose my great-grandson today. That stops now." I gripped the phone tighter, staring desperately through the glass window at Milo's fragile body. "They need the cash right now, Edmund. The administration gave me a strict deadline. International wire transfers take days to clear the banking system. We are out of time." "I do not operate like an amateur, Renata," he fired back confidently. "Stay on the line." A brief click echoed through the speaker as Edmund merged the call. A second man's voice joined the line. Edmund quickly introduced him as his corporate lawyer, Preston, who was already on the ground in the city. "Renata, listen to me carefully," Preston instructed with a brisk professional rhythm. "I am currently walking into the main lobby of your hospital in Tucson. I am bypassing the standard billing clerks and heading straight into the financial director's office." Preston explained that waiting for foreign cash to clear was far too risky. Instead, he was physically carrying a certified letter of guarantee. This legally binding document was directly tethered to Edmund's domestic trust fund, guaranteeing full, unconditional payment for any and all medical expenses incurred by the boy without a single restriction. "The administration will have zero legal grounds to deny the surgery," Preston promised firmly. "Give me exactly 5 minutes to shut down their billing department." I stood frozen in the sterile corridor, staring blankly at the floor tiles. Exactly 5 minutes later, the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit swung violently open. The same billing supervisor who had coldly rejected my pleas yesterday came rushing down the hallway. He looked completely panicked, sweating profusely while holding a signed financial clearance form. "The financial hold is completely lifted," the supervisor stammered nervously, avoiding direct eye contact with me. "Everything is fully covered." But Edmund was not finished asserting his absolute dominance over the situation. He ordered me to put the hospital's chief of hematology on the phone immediately. I walked over to the central nurses' station and handed the receiver to the head doctor, who initially looked highly annoyed by the sudden interruption. The doctor pressed the phone to his ear, ready to argue policy. Within seconds, his arrogant posture stiffened. The irritation on his face vanished instantly, replaced by absolute, terrified submission. Edmund was clearly unleashing a verbal storm, demanding top-tier treatment and immediate action for his bloodline. "Understood, sir." "Yes." "Right away," the chief of hematology replied nervously, handing the phone back to me like it was burning his hand. The doctor spun around to the nursing staff and clapped his hands loudly. "Activate the transplant protocol. Prep the OR immediately. We are moving the boy right now." Suddenly the entire floor erupted into highly coordinated chaos. A swarm of specialized nurses and technicians rushed into Milo's room. They began rapidly disconnecting non-essential monitors, prepping fresh four lines, and unlocking the wheels of his hospital bed. I stepped backward, pressing my spine against the wall as they rolled my son out of the room with incredible speed. "We will take it from here, Mom," a surgical nurse yelled back as they pushed the bed rapidly down the long corridor. I stood at the end of the hallway watching the heavy metal doors of the operating room swing shut behind them, finally allowing myself to take my first real breath in months. The transplant lasted nearly 9 hours. I sat in that sterile waiting room the entire time, unable to eat, unable to pray, unable to do anything except stare at the double doors and count the tiles on the floor over and over until the numbers blurred. When the surgeon finally emerged, still in his scrubs, and told me the procedure had gone perfectly, my knees buckled and I had to grip the armrest to keep from collapsing. My son was going to live. A stranger who owed me nothing had saved him in a single phone call, while the people who shared my blood had thrown me onto a concrete porch. 6 weeks after the surgery, the steady beep of the heart monitor had become the most peaceful sound in my life. The day the doctors finally cleared Milo for discharge marked the true beginning of my new existence. Walking out of those sliding glass doors with my son holding my hand, I made an unbreakable vow. I would never let us be vulnerable again. Never again would my child's survival depend on the mercy of people who saw him as an inconvenience. My first action was absolute deletion. I drove straight to a mobile provider, canceled my entire account, and physically snapped my old SIM card in half. I immediately transferred my minimal funds to a new bank under a strictly private account, ensuring no one could track my transactions. I returned to our cramped apartment, packed our few belongings into cardboard boxes, and broke the lease that very night. We moved into a secure, unlisted rental unit on the opposite side of Tucson. I deleted all my social media profiles and left no forwarding address. I did not notify a single relative. I completely evaporated from the lives of the toxic people who had abandoned us. Exactly 3 months later, I found myself sitting across from Edmund inside a private high-security boardroom at his downtown corporate office. The massive mahogany table between us was completely covered in thick stacks of medical paperwork, insurance claim forms, and itemized hospital bills. Edmund sat silently, his sharp eyes intensely scanning the documents line by line. He was not merely checking on Milo's health. He was aggressively analyzing my survival tactics and financial instincts. Edmund suddenly slid a heavily redacted billing summary across the polished wood. He tapped his index finger firmly against a specific column of numbers. "I had my accountants review your entire file," Edmund began, his voice echoing in the large room. "When the hospital initially threatened you, you did not just panic and accept financial ruin. You fought back like a cornered wolf." He was absolutely right. I had spent countless sleepless nights sitting beside Milo's hospital bed, aggressively reading through incomprehensible insurance policies. When the hospital attempted to overcharge us, I did not just blindly agree to pay whatever they demanded. I formally demanded a strict forensic billing review. I spent hours on the phone arguing with hostile insurance adjusters and hospital administrators. I personally highlighted overlapping surgical theater fees, exorbitant room charges, and bills for unadministered medications. By weaponizing their own policy clauses against them, I successfully forced the billing department to strike out tens of thousands of dollars in absurd duplicate charges. Edmund leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with profound respect. "You possess a ruthless analytical mindset, Renata," he stated firmly. "Most people would have completely collapsed under that kind of emotional and financial crushing weight, but you methodically dismantled a massive healthcare bureaucracy in one. You are sharp, you are stubborn, and you refuse to surrender." Edmund then picked up a heavy leather-bound folder and pushed it directly in front of me. I opened it to find a highly complex corporate employment contract. He was offering me a direct entry point into his private financial empire. "I am not offering you charity," Edmund clarified, his tone turning ice cold and strictly professional. "I am offering you a weapon. You will start at the bottom. You will work impossible hours. You will face senior executives who will try to crush you. It will be the most grueling experience of your life. But if you survive my training, you will learn exactly how to control immense wealth and power." I did not hesitate for a single second. I grabbed the silver pen from the desk and signed my name on the dotted line. Exactly 6 months later, my grueling apprenticeship officially began. I walked onto the executive floor of his investment firm, leaving my old fearful self behind forever. I threw myself headfirst into the cutthroat world of corporate finance. I sat silently in high-stakes negotiation rooms, analyzed dense trust fund portfolios, and learned how to ruthlessly eliminate bad investments. I worked aggressively every single day, arriving before sunrise and leaving long after dark. I was driven by a burning desire to build an absolute, impenetrable fortress of wealth around my son. 2 years of working under Edmund's ruthless guidance completely washed away any remaining weakness in me. I no longer operated on fear or desperation. I operated on cold, calculated strategy. The financial battlefield became my natural habitat. Edmund handed me the reins to the family's most complex trust funds, expecting me to multiply the wealth aggressively. I did not disappoint him. My first major solo conquest targeted a highly coveted, sprawling commercial real estate block in the absolute center of downtown Tucson. The plaza was a massive revenue generator, and several established investment firms were violently fighting for the property. They spent months trying to lowball the desperate owners with complicated stock options and delayed payouts. I stepped into the negotiation room and instantly changed the temperature. I did not negotiate. I dictated terms. I leveraged our liquid trust assets to bypass standard slow bank financing entirely. I slammed a massive, undeniable cash offer directly onto the table. When the rival firm executives tried to counter my bid, I stared them down. I methodically exposed their hidden financial liabilities right there in the boardroom, subtly threatening to leak their over-leveraged positions to the open market. The room fell dead silent. They packed up their briefcases and backed down immediately. I secured the bustling downtown plaza at a staggering 20% below market value, executing the absolute largest single acquisition our firm had seen in a decade. Edmund did not give me a single moment to celebrate that victory. He immediately threw me into a burning fire. One of our vital regional subsidiaries, a massive logistics and supply chain company, was bleeding capital at a catastrophic rate. The executive board of that company was incredibly bloated, lazy, and actively draining the corporate resources through gross incompetence and sheer arrogance. Edmund handed me the financial files and ordered me to either fix the company or burn it down to the ground. I chose to fix it. I flew out to their regional headquarters, walked straight past the receptionist, and kicked open the heavy boardroom doors. I initiated an absolute corporate bloodbath. I ruthlessly audited every single department within 48 hours. I discovered forged expense reports, entirely useless layers of middle management, and terrible overpriced vendor contracts. I did not hold a friendly town hall meeting to boost morale. Instead, I handed out immediate termination letters. I fired the sitting CEO, the CFO, and exactly half of the senior executive board before my first lunch break. The ousted executives were absolutely furious. They threatened to sue me, screaming wildly about their guaranteed severance packages and legal rights. I did not flinch. I calmly slid thick black binders across the mahogany table containing undeniable hard evidence of their financial negligence and corporate fraud. I looked the CEO in the eye and dared him to take me to a public court. They packed their boxes in total silence and left the building. With the dead weight removed, I personally renegotiated every single vendor contract, slashed operational waste, and completely restructured their failing supply chain from the ground up. Within 2 brutal business quarters, that dying subsidiary went from losing millions of dollars to generating a massive, record-breaking double-digit profit margin. My relentless execution sent shockwaves through the entire corporate hierarchy. The older veteran executives who had initially dismissed me as just a lucky grieving widow quickly learned to deeply fear my presence in the boardroom. I never raised my voice, but I never once backed down from a corporate confrontation. I delivered undeniable, aggressive, and highly profitable results. Recognizing my absolute domination over the entire portfolio, Edmund officially called a firm-wide meeting. He stood proudly in front of the board of directors and formally appointed me as the chief operating officer of his entire financial empire. I was no longer an apprentice or a trainee. I was his undisputed, powerful right hand. I now commanded thousands of employees and strictly controlled billions of dollars in active assets. I engineered hostile takeovers, dismantled our market competitors, and multiplied our revenue streams with merciless precision. The The desperate crying mother who once begged for her own money on a freezing concrete porch was completely dead and buried. I had successfully forged myself into a corporate apex predator. I held ultimate financial authority, and I made absolutely sure that everyone in the business world knew exactly who was in charge. Exactly 2 years after the night I was thrown out onto the street, the security camera alarm pierced the silence of the midnight hour. I was sitting in the home office of my high-rise penthouse reviewing a detailed quarterly financial report. The sharp buzz of the intercom system echoed loudly through the hallway, breaking my intense concentration. I frowned, tossing my pen onto the mahogany desk. Unscheduled visitors at this late hour were strictly prohibited. Assuming it was a late-night corporate courier or a routine check from the overnight lobby guards, I walked over to the digital wall panel and activated the high-definition live feed from the front gate. The glowing screen flickered to life. I stared at the monitor and my entire body instantly froze. Standing on the sidewalk, illuminated by the unforgiving glare of the streetlights, were my parents. The sheer shock of seeing them nearly knocked the breath out of my lungs. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes narrowing as my brain struggled to process the incredible devastation projected on the screen. The two incredibly arrogant people who had violently shoved me out of their comfortable home were completely gone. In their place stood two broken, unrecognizable figures. My father looked like he had aged a dozen brutal years in a span of just 24 months. His previously robust frame had withered into a frail, skinny shadow. He was hunched over, shivering violently against the freezing Tucson winter wind. He wore a dirty, torn coat pulled directly from a dumpster. His bare, calloused hands were shaking uncontrollably as he clutched a couple of cheap, ripped plastic bags containing their only remaining possessions. Beside him stood my mother. I almost did not recognize her face. The polished woman who once treated my suffering like absolute garbage had vanished. Her cheeks were gaunt and hollowed out. She stared blankly up at the camera lens with bloodshot, heavily sunken eyes. Thick, dark circles bruised the pale skin beneath them. Her gaze was completely empty, devoid of all the vicious pride she used to wear like a crown. They looked like desperate refugees standing in the exact same biting cold they had once abandoned me in. For a long moment I simply stood there and watched them suffer. A dark, deeply satisfying sense of vindication washed over my chest. I could have easily ignored the buzzer. I could have called the lobby guards and ordered them to physically chase those vagrants off the property. Leaving them out in the freezing dark would have been exact poetic justice. But a colder, calculated part of my mind desperately wanted to see the absolute destruction of their egos up close. I forcefully pressed the metal release button. The intercom chirped, signaling the security gates were unlocked. I turned away from the monitor and walked deliberately into the center of my expansive living room. I did not bother to offer any form of hospitality. I simply stood like a stone statue in the middle of the imported marble floor, crossing my arms tightly over my chest and waited. Several agonizing minutes passed in heavy silence. Then the private elevator bell chimed softly through the penthouse. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing my parents huddled together in the brightly lit cabin. They took one trembling step forward, their dirty, worn-out shoes landing softly on the pristine white marble. The exact moment they crossed the threshold, their eyes widened in unfiltered terror. They stared wildly at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glowing city skyline. They looked at the expensive modern artwork, the flawless leather furniture, and the overwhelming financial power radiating from every inch of the room. The contrast between my towering empire and their filthy state was incredibly brutal. Finally, their terrified eyes landed on me. I stood perfectly still, looking down at them with an expression of pure, unyielding ice. I did not take a single step forward. I did not say a single word. I purposefully let the crushing weight of the room's silence suffocate them. I held all the power now, and I fully intended to make them stand there choking on their own bitter shame until they found the courage to speak first. The moment she sat down on the leather sofa, Sheila buried her face in her hands and sobbed uncontrollably, shattering the suffocating silence of the room. Gerald remained standing for a few seconds longer, his bloodshot eyes frantically darting around my expensive living room. I stood perfectly still and watched his mind desperately calculate the situation. He saw the imported marble floors, the custom modern art, and the sheer scale of the financial power surrounding him. He quickly realized that his estranged daughter was no longer a desperate, struggling widow. I was clearly a millionaire. He knew instantly that his only chance of surviving the freezing streets was to extract my pity. And to achieve that he had to surrender the absolute humiliating truth. He heavily dropped onto the edge of the sofa next to his weeping wife. He clasped his trembling, dirt-stained hands together and stared directly at the floor. "We never renovated the house, Renata," Gerald whispered, his voice cracking violently. I simply kept my arms crossed, waiting for him to bleed out his confession. "That $100,000. We did not use a single cent of it on the property," he continued, swallowing hard. "Grant came to us with an exclusive real estate development project. He promised us massive guaranteed returns. He said we would double our retirement funds. We wanted to help him secure his position in the market." The sickening reality hung heavily in the air. They had knowingly stolen my life savings, the exact money meant to keep my son alive, to fund their golden son-in-law's greedy ambitions. They had actively chosen to gamble with Milo's survival just so Grant could play the wealthy developer. And now the universe was forcing them to pay the ultimate price. "The project failed?" I asked coldly. "Worse," Gerald choked out, a tear cutting through the dirt on his cheek. "It was entirely a scam. Grant lost everything." But he did not stop there. Sheila wailed louder, rocking back and forth on the expensive cushions. Gerald pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his torn coat pocket. His hands shook violently as he dropped it onto my glass coffee table. The bold legal header printed at the top was completely unmistakable. "General power of attorney." "He came to us panicking a few months ago," Gerald explained, his voice trembling with a chaotic mix of rage and shame. "He said he needed temporary legal leverage to restructure some commercial assets and save our initial investment. He shoved this document right in front of us. He told us it was just a standard corporate formality. Because he was family, because he was Colleen's husband, we blindly trusted him. We signed the papers immediately. We did not read a single clause." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. In the brutal corporate finance world I now controlled, signing a general power of attorney without negotiating the terms was absolute financial suicide. They had legally handed a desperate con artist the literal keys to their entire existence. "He used it against you," I stated, already anticipating the catastrophic punchline. Gerald nodded eagerly, turning a sickening shade of pale. "He legally bypassed us entirely. Grant walked into a major commercial bank, presented the signed document, and aggressively took out a massive second mortgage on our house. Because his name was legally acting as ours, the bank approved it. He completely drained all the equity we had painstakingly built over 30 years. He took the massive cash payout in full. And then," I pressed, "they vanished." Sheila shrieked, finally lifting her head. Her face was violently contorted in ultimate despair. "Colleen packed her expensive bags in the middle of the night. They permanently disconnected their phones. They emptied their shared bank accounts and fled the state without leaving a single trace. Our own beloved daughter abandoned us to rot." Gerald covered his face, entirely defeated by his own catastrophic stupidity. "We had absolutely no idea until the aggressive bank statements started arriving in the mail. We were living on a fixed income. We could not make the massive new mortgage payments. The crushing debt piled up instantly. We tried to call lawyers, but we had no money to pay them. Last week, a judge formally finalized the legal proceedings. The bank issued an immediate, irreversible foreclosure order." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with pathetic, agonizing desperation. He was no longer the imposing patriarch who had thrown me into the freezing cold. He was just a broken, terrified old man begging for his life. "The county sheriff came in this morning, Renata. They ordered us out on the lawn. They changed the locks on the doors. They permanently confiscated the property. We have absolutely nothing left in this world. We are officially homeless." The atmosphere inside the living room instantly solidified, leaving only the pathetic, ragged breathing of the two people sitting opposite me. Gerald stared at the floor, rubbing his trembling, dirt-stained hands together. The crushing weight of his massive financial ruin shattered his ego completely. He did not attempt to deliver an emotional speech. He did not dare to mention our shared bloodline or family loyalty. He knew he had violently destroyed those privileges 2 years ago on his front porch. Instead, he simply looked up at me with dead, defeated eyes. Just let us stay here for a few weeks, Gerald begged, his voice completely hollow and desperate. Just give us a small corner to sleep in, Renata. Just until we can find a place. Sheila let out a pathetic whimper, nodding her head rapidly while gripping the edge of the leather sofa. I did not step forward. I simply stared down at the two miserable strangers sitting in my home. I searched my chest for any remaining affection, but I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No sadness. I only felt a cold, calculated finality. I slowly leaned forward, locking my eyes directly onto my father's terrified face. Consider that $100,000 payment for raising me, I stated, my voice echoing like solid ice through the silent room. I paid you both off in full 2 years ago. We have zero remaining debt. Gerald flinched violently as if I had physically struck him across the face with a metal pipe. Sheila gasped loudly, burying her face back into her dirty hands. They recognized their own venomous words instantly. The devastating realization that their own cruelty had permanently sealed their fate finally crashed down upon them. I turned my back on them immediately. I walked purposefully toward the digital wall panel. I lifted the heavy security receiver and pressed the direct emergency line to the lobby desk. Send me overnight security detail up to my penthouse immediately, I ordered, firmly projecting absolute authority. I have 2 unauthorized trespassers who need an aggressive escort off the premises right now. Do not let them back into this building under any circumstances. I slammed the receiver back onto the wall hook, the loud plastic crack making both of them jump in terror. Gerald desperately tried to stand up to beg one last time, but the sheer coldness in my posture stopped him dead. He collapsed back down. Within seconds, the private elevator timed loudly. 2 uniformed security guards stepped out into my foyer. They grabbed my parents firmly by the arms without hesitation. Sheila started screaming hysterically, reaching her hands out toward me as the guards dragged them backward. I did not blink. I stood perfectly still and watched the guards force them into the metal cabin. The heavy steel elevator doors slammed shut, instantly cutting off her pathetic wails. The silence rushed back into the penthouse. They were gone forever. I took a deep, grounding breath, letting the toxic history permanently leave my body. I turned around and walked slowly down the long, quiet hallway, leaving the empty living room behind. I gently pushed open the heavy oak door at the very end of the hall. The spacious room was softly illuminated by a small, warm nightlight. I walked quietly over to the large bed. Milo was sleeping soundly. He was healthy, strong, and completely safe. The rhythmic, natural rise and fall of his chest was the ultimate proof of my absolute victory over them. I leaned over, gently pulling the thick, warm blanket up to his small shoulders. I lowered my head and pressed a soft kiss against his warm forehead. He shifted slightly, a peaceful smile forming on his face in the dark. I stood beside his bed, completely surrounded by absolute peace. Bloodlines did not create a family. Unconditional loyalty did. I had successfully protected my real family, and I had permanently closed the door on the wolves who once tried to throw us to the cold. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. Do you agree with my final decision, or should I have shown them mercy despite their betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.